Hello. Today is Friday, March 5th. Hope you all have a good week so far. I'm Cindy Allen, CEO of TradeForce Multiplier, a global trade consultancy service where we handle everything high level from strategic trade and initiatives and activities and support all the way to handling those pesky 28s and 29s that are coming from CBP right now with all the increased enforcement. We also do classification and risk review. Welcome to Simply Trade Cindy's version, where I base an international trade update on a Taylor Swift song, thus the name Cindy's version. This podcast is brought to you in association with the Global Training Center. Today's song from Taylor Swift is Wish List, which is off of her latest album. We'll get into that in a moment. But first, what's happened in trade this week? So today, still no budget agreement in Congress, which means that most of the components of DHS are not getting funded. So TSA, not funded, not getting paid. FEMA, not funded, not getting paid. CBP is a little bit different because the officer component of CBP, the guys in the blue shirts and the guns and badges, are actually getting paid, and they are funded through the big, beautiful bill that was passed earlier. But any other administrative function, Office of Trade personnel, anyone who is not considered to be officers and have that law enforcement designation, law enforcement officer or LEO designation, are not getting paid. So basically, we're seeing longer lines at the airport for TSA because many of them have taken another job because they haven't gotten, a couple of paychecks now, and there are issues. People are not showing up for work. So those TSA lines are getting a little bit longer at the airports. So that's the latest update. No agreement in sight for that. The holdup is the funding over ICE and some of the disagreements between the Democrats and the Republicans on how that is being handled. Some thought when Kristi Noem was let go of DHS as the secretary that would kind of unstick this budget discussion. And it doesn't seem to have had an impact on that moving forward. So we'll keep an eye on that. Hopefully you don't have to travel too much. And if you do, add in some extra time. The Strait of Hormuz, where more than anywhere between 20 and 40% of the world's oil travels through, is effectively closed. As I mentioned last week, India made an agreement with Iran to protect their ships moving through the Strait of Hormuz, that they will not be attacked. And we have now news reports that China is negotiating with Iran in a little bit different fashion. The China negotiations have functioned around how the oil gets paid for, and that's important. They are proposing that the oil gets paid for in the Chinese currency. And that's a significant change and departure from what's known as the petrodollar system, which has been in place since the mid-1970s as a result of the oil and gas crisis in the early 1970s. There were agreements made with the Middle East and OPEC that all of the countries worldwide would actually buy oil with the dollar, the US dollar. This is what has led to the U.S. Currency being known as the world's reserve currency. And that's because that currency, the U.S. dollar, was required to buy oil from anyone in the Mideast from OPEC. And what has happened is if China actually is successful in these negotiations and able to buy oil using the Chinese dollar, that undercuts the petrodollar process, and other countries are likely to follow suit. This means that the reserve currency, the world's reserve currency, the US dollar, will be very affected. And that's because all of the banks across the world had to keep a reserve of US dollars in their bank account so they could buy oil from the Middle East. And they hold that in reserve. So it props up the value of the dollar. And we think that if that continues, even if only China does it, it's going to have an adverse effect on the dollar, on U.S. debt. Calculations are positioned as the world's U.S. currency or the world's currency reserve and our overall economy. So it is something that everyone and the economists are really paying close attention to, that is going to impact the overall economy, not just the gas prices. And we've seen some gas prices being affected. It's kind of been up and down as countries actually release some of the oil that's been held in reserves to ease the gas prices and the shortages. But we don't see a long-term solution to the issues in the Strait of Hormuz. You're seeing some calls from different sides, to open it up in different ways, and none of them seem to be taking effect and having the end result being an open Strait of Hormuz. We'll keep an eye on that. Jones Act. The Jones Act is an act that's been on the books for hundreds of years, and it requires U.S.-based steamship lines to actually transit waters from one U.S. Territory or port to another U.S. territory or port. The administration is looking at actually issuing a Jones Act waiver. I talked about this a little bit last week as well, but they are honing in on possible commodities in the chemical, the energy sector, and fertilizer sectors that could ease some of the restrictions and transportation limitations caused by the Jones Act to get those chemicals and fertilizers from other areas of the world during this oil crisis. In other news, Trump has postponed a trip to China. Trip was supposed to focus on the trade agreement between China and the U.S. and talk about how we move forward, what the state of the agreement is, and possibly talking about how we continue trade with China on our terms with some limitations. That trip has been postponed. No reason on why, but we do know that it has been postponed. So probably no news out of China on the trade agreements. Closer to home, U.S. and Mexico actually met. The U.S. Trade Representative in Washington, D.C. this week, and they have directed their technical terms to meet on a regular basis to move forward the discussions on USMCA. Also very good. That's good news for us. We do, most people in trade would prefer it to be extended for another year and not actually be renegotiated, but at least we see some progress moving forward, at least with Mexico. No news on Canada and U.S. discussions. There's been some tensions there, as everyone has seen on the news. So hopefully that will be brought in and we won't have a bilateral agreement, which many people are thinking that it will go to a bilateral agreement instead of that trilateral USMCA agreement. But at least they're talking. They're sitting down and talking. In CBP news, CBP released an internal advice ruling, and I'm going to give you the number. It's HQ 350722. If you are an importer, you need to look at that. Why? This is an internal advice that the Center for Automotive and Aerospace asked headquarters to rule on the use of an OCR tool, an optical character recognition tool, and as well as the filing of a CF 5106. And the 5106 is actually what puts an importer on file with U.S. Customs. And they ruled that those two things are customs business. So why does that matter? What is the change here? Before this ruling, work was performed, including classification work was performed, and OCR and 5106 was performed directly on behalf of the importer themselves. They did not have to use a customs broker because it did not fall within the definition of customs business. So they could go out and get a consultant who wasn't a customs broker and say, hey, we need help with classifications. We need to develop our database. We need to convert our manual shipping information into data that we can use and then send to our customs broker. And also we want to make sure we're putting ourselves on file with customs, or our consignees are on file with customs. That wasn't required to be performed as a customs broker or by a customs broker. This ruling indicates and turns that on its head, that all of those specific items, converting shipment information in a digital format through OCR, is customs business. Classification, even if performed for the importer alone, is customs business. And the 5106 filing is customs business because it's in furtherance of filing and entry. All of those items are in furtherance of filing and entry. So it falls in the definition of customs business. This will have a huge impact if you are not using a customs broker for some of those activities. I suggest that you read this very carefully, talk with your consultants, talk with your service providers, and talk with an attorney to understand how this might impact your own internal processes that are functioning right now. If I were a betting person, I would say this might be challenged because it's very restrictive and certainly is not in keeping with other rulings that have been held that these, if performed by an importer, are not customs business. So we'll see how this moves forward. It also gives a chilling effect, I think, on AI and technical use that is directly offered to importers. Yeah, whether they use AI or not, or OCR or not, if you have to insert a customs broker into that process, it's going to add cost, complexity, and possibly be duplicative of some of the efforts that a customs broker has. Many importers actually pursue services outside of their customs broker as a measure to ensure compliance and to measure the effectiveness of your customs broker and making sure that they are doing things accurately. This also challenges that ability to do that, where if you have to use a customs broker to check your customs broker, that's two different customs brokers, and there's going to be some issues moving forward there. So huge news in the customs brokerage world. I don't know anyone who is like saying, yay, this is customs business. Even the customs brokers out there are a little perplexed by how this has been interpreted and how we're going to deal with this moving forward, especially as customs brokers have these tools themselves and perform business on behalf of importers themselves that they may not be filing the customs entry on. What does that look like? How is that moving forward, a service offering moving forward? So something to keep an eye on, definitely, as we move forward. So let's get down to it. Wish list. Why did I choose wish list? Well, the specific lyrics I think that are applicable here is, and they should have what they want. They deserve what they want. Hope they get what they want. I just want you. This is, and further on in the song, she says, boss up, settle down, got a wish list. I just want you. Basically, importers just want their refunds. They just want that refund. They just want a process to get a refund. And I think that we've seen a couple of court filings, a couple of court hearings outlining the CAPE process that I talked about last week, and understanding, what that's going to look like, the process, the timeline, software, how they are complete, how they are going to meet that requirement moving forward, they being CBP. And there's still so many open questions. Are court actions required for finally liquidated entries? We don't know. We wish we knew. Are protests going to be required for liquidated entries that are within the protestable time frame of that 180 days? We don't know. What declarations are going to be required? What information is going to be required to be sent in this CAPE format to CBP? Is it just going to be entry number? Is it going to be entry number and IOR number? Or is it going to be a full filing of the entry summary information that has to be sent? I don't think it will be. Reading the court filing by CBP, it said very simple, high-level information. So I don't think it's going to be a full entry summary set. I'm not sure, but that's what it appears to me. What will CAPE cover? Is it going to cover everything? Is it going to cover all of the complexities? Is it just going to cover the very simple, this is, I paid IEEPA and I need that money back? Is it going to cover the EU and Japan agreements that were capped at 15% and had very complex calculations underneath that, where, some of it was IEEPA, some of it was regular duty, but you reported it all on the IEEPA line? Will that be covered? What about reconciliation? What about drawbacks? Will the ACE entry summary actually, in fact, be updated? I think it will be in my reading, but we're not sure. What is going to be left out? Will you, if you accidentally leave out an entry number, does CBP just keep that revenue forever, or the Treasury? Because actually duties are deposited directly into the U.S. Treasury. CBP doesn't have control over it. Will the government just end up keeping that money? Or will the court step in and say you have to refund everything to the best of your ability? We're not sure. Some of the comments by the judge in the original hearing indicated he felt all the duties were unlawful and they all had to be refunded. Some legal minds are saying there's no administrative mechanism to refund that money. How do we then go about that? So we aren't quite sure what those are, but we do have that one wish list. We just want you. We want you, refund, Mr. Refund. We just want you. Talk to you next week.